What's the creepiest thing you've noticed at work? Story 1. I used to work at a Boy Scout summer camp. Every week I had to take a big group of campers to a secluded spot for their wilderness survival badge, where they had to build a shelter out of sticks, leaves, etc., and sleep in it overnight. The spot was only about a half-mile from the main camp, but we took them on a circuitous route that made it seem really secluded. Anyways, on this one night all the campers had made their shelters. We had cooked dinner and were all just sitting around the campfire. It was getting late, maybe 11, so I sent all the campers to their shelters for the night and started cleaning up the fire. That's when we heard in the distance what sounded like church bells. They were pretty faint, but myself and my fellow staffers could definitely hear them. They went on for about 30 minutes, ringing every 30 seconds or so. We were all a little creeped out, as there were no churches or towns within 20 miles of us. After the bells stopped though, the singing started. It was too faint to hear the words, but it sounded like church choir music, but a lot of people, and a lot more enthusiastic. Also, it was almost midnight at this point. The singing went on for well over an hour, sometimes quieting down until we almost couldn't hear it, sometimes getting so loud we thought it was getting closer. All of the campers were super creeped out, but I lied to them, telling them there was a church service going on in camp, and that there was nothing to be scared of. Eventually, at almost 1 a.m., the singing stopped. I found out a few days later that there had been a large KKK rally only a few miles away that night, and that's what we had heard. I've camped near a river, and in the middle of the night I was convinced that I could hear people chanting, but I couldn't make out what. In daylight I realized that it was just the sound of the river running over stones. I've often awoken at 5 a.m. and imagined all sorts of things, but as soon as the sun rises, all fears go away. At my Boy Scout camp, we had the same thing for wilderness survival. I was not taking that badge, but they decided the cooking merit badge people should cook dinner for the WS badge people. So while they're making their shelters, we had to make food. Seems fair. My cooking buddies and I did not make shelters because there wasn't enough time / we were too lazy after dinner. So 6 of us shared the one pillow of the guy smart enough to bring one. Fortunately, it didn't rain, but I had nothing but shorts and a short sleeve shirt, so it was chilly. And my one buddy bought a space blanket for himself, which crinkled the entire night. Anyway, not quite the experience you had. That's creepy as hell. We actually had a really nice setup for the staff. Campers would stay for 1 week, but the camp ran for 7 weeks, so we would take a new group of campers out to the same site every week for almost 2 months straight. My staff and I built a huge shelter that was large enough for all of the staff. We insulated it with a scrap tent canvas and put a chimney in the middle. On really cold or rainy nights, we'd take some large stones and heat them up in the fire, then put them in the center of our shelter and pour water over them, making a sweat lodge. I also had a hammock set up for clear / warm nights to sleep outside. Story 2. I used to work in the Gulf of Mexico on oil rigs for years, and it may not exactly be creepy, but I found it really unsettling. In deep ocean water, the water itself is really clear, so everyone can plainly see all of the tuna and barracudas hanging around the rig, waiting for the onboard cook to throw off whatever food waste he needs to. Every once in a while, a huge great white shark would swim up from underneath and snatch a tuna, and it really took less than a second. They're really scary. I worked for a guy that spearfished underneath the rigs out in the Gulf. He said it was perfect, since there were tons of fish underneath and the sharks would never go between the legs, just wait for a fish to leave. Plus, the view was amazing. Looking down and seeing nothing but the abyss, he loved it. I can only imagine how scared I would be. Had a friend who, I don't know what his actual position was, but he would basically make sure the rig wasn't falling apart. Always told stories of the creepy Lovecraftian stuff you'd see in the cameras around the support structures deep underwater up north, like jellyfish that just rise like a large black blanket, or weirdo fish hunting and eating in ways that made them look like insects. Oh, and all of the varying kinds of crabs and squid with real screw that screw you I'm out body proportions. To add to this, the cooks would always throw food overboard through the grinder, more efficient than hauling leftover / spoiled food back to shore. Anyways, a few years ago, our day response team used to practice man overboard drills, toss a crash test dummy overboard, have someone in the platform spotting, and then the fast response team would have to assemble, deploy the recovery boat, and retrieve the dummy. Well, the one day they were doing the drill, I guess the spotter lost track of the dummy for a bit. Usually pretty easy to find even if this happens. Just reposition and track the current, plus bright orange life jacket. Anyways, they kept looking for the dummy, but couldn't find any sign of it, so the boat team just kept checking. Eventually, they found a single piece, the leg from the knee down. It had bite marks on it. Story 3. I've worked in Canada's north for a few years now in oil and gas. It's pretty creepy when during the night shift you realize a moose has just been standing at the tree line staring you down for an unknown length of time, or finding bear tracks crossing the tracks you just made 5 minutes ago. Honestly, the silence of a snowy forest in the dead of night, hundreds of kilometers away from anything, is pretty spooky. When your only contact with the outside world is a radio channel nobody's listening to, you feel pretty alone. Hey, I work in the frozen hellhole of Hoth too. Bears. Bears everywhere. Sometimes I have to chase them out of our work site in my pickup. Last year, I put up a big "Beware of Bears" sign, and a bear knocked it over and took a big, beefy stuff on it. Can't make this up. I was out surveying creeks with a field partner in a super remote area of Northern California. Hot and dry, and pretty much burned out now by the August complex fires. Long story short, I was hiking up a creek in a really dry, open, and mostly grassy area with a little bit of vegetation along the banks, and we came across this lovely glade with lots of trees and shade, and it was gorgeous, and like 90 degrees in there instead of the more than 100. As we came back out into the 105-degree open area on the far side of it, there was a big, wet cat print on a rock. I pooped myself. Never saw the cat, but it was not a small one. Man, the North is something else. In the military, we had training exercises in the Arctic. Once we got dropped by a plane on a remote island in March. This place is uninhabited all year round except for a few weeks in the summer when scientists come and live in this observation station and do a fauna/climate research. It's so isolated that the fastest way out is redoing a plane in the nearest village 350 kilometers away. We were camped close by, so we decided to go take a look. Nothing was locked. I'm talking no more than 10 plain old shacks, plywood and sheet metal barracks. The whole place had a The Thing feel to it. We walk into the main building that serves as a kitchen, dining hall, and common area. Like 8 or 10 of us, armed no less for bears, and we shine our lights around exploring, looking at the cool pictures and maps. Then the whole mood drops and we're all like, I don't like this. Yeah, me neither. Let's bounce. Eeriest place I've been. I swear this place could have been the stage of horrors. Story 4. I used to be a delivery driver, which doesn't sound very remote because it isn't. However, I did have to deliver to some pretty remote places. One time I delivered to a trailer park just barely inside our designated delivery zone, and it was very dark and poorly lit. I leave my car running and keep the headlights and inside lights on to go deliver the pizza. Upon returning to my car, I sit down in the driver's seat and look up to see a creepy old man standing less than 3 feet from my side of the car. He was just staring. It was the equivalent of a jump scare. I just started driving forward and had to do a U-turn to get out of the park. When I turned around, the man was standing in the middle of the road, so I freaked out for a second before speeding around him only to watch him attempt to chase my car out of the trailer park. I put in my 2 weeks after that. You reminded me of something creepy that happened to me. I also used to be a delivery driver, but for a supermarket in the UK. A lot of our customers were in the middle of nowhere, and my last delivery of the night was a new customer I'd never been to before. I was already running late from all my previous deliveries, and I was still trying to find this house at 10:30 p.m., even though my shift was supposed to finish at 10 p.m. I'm driving around the narrowest of country roads with nothing surrounding me but dark fields and hedgerows, looking for anything that might be a driveway. I hadn't seen another car or person for miles. Then, all of a sudden, I heard a loud thud on the side of my van, like something was thrown at it. No trees or anything else around for something to fall from, and I remember it specifically hitting the side. I looked in my mirrors and out the window, but there was nothing around me. Then it happened again, another thud on the side of my van. I drove back to the supermarket so fast and told my manager that I couldn't find the place. I had spent 30 minutes looking, to be fair. There was no house where the listed address/postcode took me. If there had been a house, they would have called and complained about not getting a delivery, so you know it was some kind of a setup. That's what I thought, and I was never told that they phoned up to complain about their missing items, and they never attempted to redeliver. I think they were contacted to provide better directions to their address, but were never heard from again. The weird part is they had to place the order and pay for their delivery items first, and at the time the shop had a minimum spend of £60 for deliveries, so if it was a prank it was an expensive one. Also, the only thing around for miles was empty fields, and the only place someone could have hidden was within or behind a hedgerow. So if it was a human, they must have been hiding in a freezing cold hedgerow for over an hour, since my delivery was supposed to be scheduled for 9:30 p.m. Yeah, you 100% avoided being murdered. Story 5. I was on a boat sitting on anchor in a secluded bay in the early hours in southeast Alaska a few years ago. I stepped outside for a smoke, and all of a sudden I heard the most horrific sounds of a wild animal being murdered by another wild animal. It went on for probably 10 minutes. I know it's just nature, but man, I can still hear that sound in my brain and it haunts me. When I was like 10, I saw my old, large, goofy, happy-go-lucky black lab gargle down a baby rabbit that happened to shoot past him. It was maybe 4 or 5 chomps, but goddamn those screams as it was being devoured were horrifying. The worst thing I'd heard at that age, and probably still one of the worst things now. After those probably 15 seconds, which in my little mind was probably something like 15 years, my old, large, goofy, happy-go-lucky black lab just came up to me so full of vigor and youth, like he was on top of the world, as if he had smoked the purest crack after banging his high school crush. How could I be mad at him? He seemed to have just fulfilled a lifelong dream of his, but his dream, well, it will still haunt mine. I was sleeping with the window open one summer in Washington State, at the house in a wildlife park where I was interning. I was awakened at 2 a.m. by the most horrifying yowling/screaming sound and promptly shut my window, but laid awake for a long time because my monkey brain said, "Oh, you would have died if you'd been sleeping out there." It was likely a red fox or bobcat because they make surprisingly demon-like sounds, but it definitely could have been a mountain lion as well. Scared the crap out of me. I heard a mountain lion killing what I think was a young elk in the Medicine Bow mountain range in Wyoming. My son and I were on one side of a canyon, and this incident was occurring on the other side of the canyon. The sounds were amplified off of the canyon walls, and it was the most sadistic thing I'd ever heard. I loved the experience of witnessing a component of nature that gives people nightmares. It's good to know what nature is capable of, but goddamn, it'd be great to not die by the paws of a mountain lion. Story 6. I used to do agricultural work, alone in a field for 10 hours a day kind of thing. The pure amount of times I heard the sound of running and snapped up to see literally nothing there was horrific. I was convinced it was surely animals between the trees for a while, but the weirdest moment was when I heard it loudly from a row of trees next to me and immediately ducked under to see the feet of whatever animal was running by, and there was absolutely nothing. I remember trying to stay calm and walking really fast to the toilet block and sitting in there for a good long while before I came back. I never thought I'd be so freaked out in the daytime, but there wasn't a soul nearby for quite a way, and it really amped up my imagination. I was hunting a few weeks ago during the week, hiked into a location probably 2 miles in. I walked into a thick part of the forest where the sunlight was barely peeking through, and started to get a really uneasy feeling. The feeling you get when you know someone is watching you. I took my gun off safety. That's how uneasy I felt. I looked down to take another step, so as to not crunch any twigs, and I heard like 5 or 6 bipedal sprinting steps coming towards me from the clearing behind me. I snapped around and didn't see anything. Then about 10 seconds after that, I heard wing flaps directly above my head in the canopy that were out of this world. It sounded like it had enough air pressure to lift a freaking car. I looked up but didn't see anything. I noped the hell out of there and called the hunt that day. When I sit on the porch of my cottage at night, and it is in a remote area, bears have enjoyed cleaning off my barbecue on occasion, for example, and as I sit there at night, I swear I hear charging bears in the trees 40 feet away. When I shine my flashlight, it's almost always red squirrels, which are tiny, like basically chipmunk size, with a bigger tail. Once in a while, it's a porcupine, loud, slow, and seemingly dumb, or a fox that makes less noise than the squirrels, and they move fast. Sometimes it's a wild mink too, and raccoons. As I've never seen anything really frightening while I was sitting there, bears seem to be smart and wait until we are all asleep to check out the place, but they prefer the small garbage dump 10 kilometers away anyhow. Perhaps the most frightening thing is our cottage neighbor showed me a photo he took from about 8 years ago of a cougar on our road. Those are not officially in Ontario, Canada. They're proven to be around on Manitoulin Island, but we are near southern Algonquin Park. But clear as day, that's a frickin' cougar in the picture. They scare me more than black bears, which actually just usually want to run the other way. Story 7. I was a field geologist in the outback about 12 hours north of Adelaide. One day I was driving the truck and saw what looked like a flagpole sticking up in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't anywhere near a farm or anywhere else that people would be, so I decided to drive over and check it out. It was a dead dog fully impaled on a spike, like from butt to mouth. Took some pictures and had my boss call the cops. But for the rest of the assignment, I was freaked out that some maniac was out there with me. My paleontology teacher told a story once involving poles in a desert, though with fewer dead dogs. He had permission from the owner to walk the property looking for fossils, and there were these poles at semi-regular intervals around the property. He looked up at the house at one point and saw a glinting light and kept moving. Later, he realized those were distance markers and the guy was up in his house following him with a rifle. Work in oil and gas in the middle of Australia. This isn't anything to be weirded out at. Locals display their wild dog kills. I've seen them hanging from roadside signs, fence stays, etc. So it's just some bored individual showing his mates what he's killed. Yes, these are wild dogs, not dingoes. Actual domestic dogs that live in packs, destroying wildlife, etc. I've seen some that look like huskies, etc. Story 8. It was a creepy occurrence. I live in a ranch off of a quiet dirt road. Our distant neighbors, the nearest house is about 1 mile away as the crow flies, have had issues with people stealing things out of their outbuildings and storage sheds in the area. It was also late in the year, so it was starting to get dark around 6 p.m. So as a result, every time I would see headlights go down our road, I would watch to make sure they weren't stopping on the property. One evening, I see a vehicle going very slowly down the road and coming to a stop at the end of our driveway, about 120 yards from our front porch. The vehicle is parked right in front of a 60s pickup I have parked, so I think whoever it is might be looking to steal it, or just looking over the property. Whatever the case, I decide to put on a black coat and grab my rifle to go investigate. It's dark out, so I stay out of the headlights of the vehicle so I can get close. I can tell it is a white van, but I don't see anything else distinguishing about the van. When I'm about 50 yards away, the van backs up and turns into our driveway. I freeze as the headlights wash across me standing in the middle of the driveway, and I see the reflective FedEx logos on the side of the van. Needless to say, the FedEx driver probably pooped his pants as he suddenly sees a dark figure standing in the middle of a field in the dark holding a rifle. Surprisingly, after I try to give a friendly wave and a smile, he continues up the driveway to my house and I get to explain the situation and we both have a laugh. So that's how I got to be the creepy guy in some FedEx delivery driver's story. I never thought to include how I was the creepy part of someone else's story. You just made me realize that I've got a good one too. I live in one of the biggest suburban neighborhoods in our city, and from time to time it gets targeted for a lot of low-hanging fruit crime stuff. Examples include an inordinate amount of package theft around Christmas, organized car door pullings at night, etc. While houses were still under construction, material theft was pretty common too. A critical thing to know is that I spotted and interrupted a band of thieves one night, but the police were so slow to respond that they easily got away, including the guy who I watched them leave behind. Then I watched them return to retrieve him. It's about 10 p.m. this particular night and raining. I don't remember the date, but it was sometime around tax season when a lot of people were starting to get tax refunds in the mail. I see a beat-up old truck slowly pull down my cul-de-sac and stop at every mailbox on the street. At 10 p.m. at night, in the rain, this guy was clearly pulling mail, looking for tax return checks, most likely, or any other valuables, at the least. I immediately called the police and described the vehicle, but it's a big neighborhood. No doubt this car will be blocks away by the time they arrive, and easily get away again. Against my better judgment, I decided to get in my car to see if I could keep an eye on them. They hadn't gotten far, and as soon as they saw my vehicle, they stopped digging in mailboxes and slowly pulled away. They started to leave the neighborhood but then stopped at the last second in a community parking area by the entrance. I had a brilliant idea. I pulled up and blocked the parking area so they couldn't leave. I just sat in my car and watched as they clearly started to panic. I kept the car in drive and was alert and ready to bolt if they tried to pull anything. After a few minutes of moving their truck around to try and find a way to leave, I see them get out. I didn't want any part of that, so I drove off a little to let them out, but I realized I was still blocking the entrance to the community, and I continued to do that. They pulled up behind me, but then backed off and went back into the neighborhood. I stayed put. Within a few minutes, they came back and pulled up behind me, but I continued to block the entrance. After what looked like some more panicky moves on their part, they started to get out of their truck again. Again, I wanted no part of a real confrontation, so I moved and let them go. They quickly drove past and left the neighborhood, right as a cop car pulled up. I flagged him down, told him I was the one that called, and told him the truck had literally just left as he pulled up. To my surprise, the cop swung around, turned on his lights, and went after him. Ha! Take that, criminals! Later, the cop came to my house and explained that the guy was putting out flyers in people's mailboxes for his lawn mowing business. The cop didn't do anything to the guy, but did tell him he really shouldn't have been doing that, especially at night. That's the story of how I acted like a maniac and most likely freaked the living hell out of some random guy just trying to earn a living. I live in basically the same setup as you, way off a dirt road with distant neighbors. We share a gate with one neighbor. One day, I came home and the gate was left open. Normally, that's just for a repairman or something, so I thought nothing of it. For reference, our drive splits into a bunch of various paths that go to different barns and outbuildings and is pretty well forested, so impossible to see which one actually goes to the house. I traveled up our driveway a ways towards the house when I catch a glimpse downhill of the poor FedEx truck hauling ass down the drive towards the gate. Poor dude wandered in too far and apparently got very lost. I found my package outside a random shed. Story 9. I spent some time in the peat swamp forests of Borneo studying wild orangutans. We would go into the forest very early around 4 a.m. One morning, there was a clouded leopard on the trail that we used to enter the forest. It was just crouched there watching us. We shouted and tried to act big. One of the indigenous people we worked with even took out his slingshot and shot rocks at it. He missed on purpose, just trying to scare it off. It stayed there for a good 5 minutes watching us before it slowly walked into the thick brush off the cleared trail. When we walked by, I shined my light to where it had walked to and could clearly see a pair of reflective eyes only 3 meters away crouched watching us pass. Creepy, but also incredibly cool to see in person for how critically endangered they are. I saw a talk of a guy once who did field work with, I think, chimps in the Congo. I've never had any romantic impressions about fieldwork to start with, since I knew quite a few people who did fieldwork, so I knew how hard it is. But this guy's work was on another level. Just for the political and social backdrop of the work alone. I mean, the Congo is just ridiculously dangerous, but it also took him like 24 hours of flights, half in quite unsafe planes, a 2-hour boat trip, and 4 4-hour hikes just to get to the site. All to basically get up at 4 a.m. each day, hike to the sleeping place of the group for that night, and get pissed down on from the trees trying to collect urine samples, and then hike all day through the jungle to follow the group, and do his behavioral data collection, collect more poop and pee, hike back to camp for the night and do it all over again the next day. For 6 months, 3 times. On top of that, camp is just the bare minimum of anything, not to imagine what would have happened if anyone got injured or sick. The trip to the next hospital was like 8 hours, through the Congo jungle. Also, he, like most people in the field, was a PhD student, so all that work for like 1,200 euros a month. Oh, and sure, chimps can also get super dangerous and violent, as well as tons of other creatures down there in the jungle, so there's that as well. As I said, I never had any romantic images about fieldwork to begin with, but that guy's talk really made me realize just how freaking hard it can be, and that never in my life I could do such incredibly demanding work. I have the absolute deepest respect for all field workers out there. Really, really great work, guys. Keep it up. Story 10. I'm not sure if this counts because it's a farm, but when you live on a farm, you work on a farm, so I guess I'll tell you. I grew up on a farm and in high school used to mess with my friends by hiding and making them find me. One night my friend was over and we were waiting on this other guy. We see him pull up, so we take off running to hide. It's funny because they have to wander around somewhere they're unfamiliar with or go ask my parents and be told, too bad, you'll have to find her. It's like forced hide and seek. Anyway, this one night I saw my friend hide in one building while I ran for the trees. I was hiding under some bushes and heard some breathing. Like human breathing. There were no animals around. It creeped me out so bad I ran out of hiding to greet my friend. I felt so uncomfortable for the rest of the night. Sometime during the night, my dad heard something and went out to investigate. In the morning, he discovered that one of our cows was killed and butchered. My girlfriend's family has a farm, and at least once or twice a year, some lowlife will break into the farm late at night to try and steal tools and equipment. Usually her uncle, who lives right next door, will see or hear the car pull into the gravel and wake up. Usually it takes about 2 minutes for him, his sons and his brother to wake up, rush in, and box the thief's car in with 3 or 4 pickup trucks. The last guy locked himself in his car and called the cops on himself because he was scared they were going to beat his ass. They were. Your story sounds way scarier. I grew up in a rural area. There was a field to the north, south, and west of us. The south and west were used for grazing for a time. This was when I was 1 year old. I pulled up into my parents' driveway and a guy got out and knocked on the door. He told my dad one of his cows got out. Well, they aren't our cows. They were the farmers down the road. But being a nice guy, my dad goes out to help find the cow. My mom, who is now alone with me and with the car still running in the driveway, calls the farmer. He tells her he will be out in a bit. After a bit, my mom gets an uneasy feeling and looks out the window at the car. There are still 3 people in the car. She decided to then call the sheriff. After giving the description of the car, the dispatch asks her if she is alone and where her husband is. My mom, in a bit of a panic, asks why. The dispatch tells her to get a gun and to lock the doors. The car matches a description of known Satanists. I'm not knocking modern Satanists, but this was the 80s, and they were weird back then. So my dad is alone in the woods with a guy that might be looking to kill him for some ritual. All of a sudden, my dad is at the house with our neighbor. The dude in the woods took off when our neighbor showed up, and the car took off when they saw my dad walking up. There was no cow that was loose. The farmer went and took a head count. It was all made up. Just weird. Story 11. Working on ships. There was one night I was on a ship sailing through the Alaskan waters, and it happened to be my first night ever seeing the Northern Lights. I can't believe how awesome that was. It made the sky clear, made the night look like it was dusk, and we were able to see clearly for miles. A few buddies and I hit the roof, or what we call the Lido deck, at 1 a.m. just to gaze at it. An hour or so in, there were 6 of us on top, nearly the entire crew now. A big white spotlight shines at us. We were near land, but where the spotlight was above the water, and it wasn't low enough to be on a ship. This was very high up. It shined on us for about 15 to 20 seconds. Once the light turned off, we looked to see what it was. Saw nothing. No trace of an aircraft or anything. A couple of minutes went by and the same light shone on us. This time it was on the other side of our vessel, above the mountains. Still unable to see what it was, we all saw it. We all have never seen any aircraft hovering above these waters, especially at 2 a.m. We don't know what it was. We think it might have been some sort of silenced aircraft the military was probably doing drills or something, but anyway, that was one of the weirder things to happen out on the ocean. I was sailing up the Inside Passage 3 weeks ago, and we sighted a bright light on top of a mountain several miles away. We checked the charts and nothing was charted. A minute or so later, and the light was gone. That was a little weird, but my XO is extra weirded out about it and starts telling us a story that's almost identical to yours that happened to him about 15 years ago when he first started sailing in Alaska. Other weirdness, we were anchored just off the coast, and our radar started wiggling out. It was lighting up spots of long dashes going outward from the ship all around us. Not a typical type of radar error as far as I can tell. I'm a competent user, but no radar expert. It's an error that can happen if another ship's radar syncs up with yours and you start receiving their signals, but no other ships were anywhere near there. There's an abandoned Cold War air base nearby, but that's my only lead. That is strange. Reminds me of when myself and a friend were playing in his garden, which is surrounded by trees in the middle of the night, when a spotlight randomly pointed straight down at us. We looked up and there was nothing there. We thought it was his dad playing tricks on us, but as we looked over our shoulders and into the living room, his parents were both sitting quite comfortably watching TV. They never believed what we said we saw. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like, and don't forget to subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.